The acrid stench of sulfur hung thick in the air, mixing with the swirling orange dust that painted Scoria V's sky a perpetual twilight. Cale wiped sweat from his brow, leaving another streak of grime across his face as he hunched over the ancient communications array. His fingers, once steady at the controls of top-tier military craft, now trembled slightly as they danced across the corroded circuitry of the abandoned mining station's equipment. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, tapping a power coupling with a makeshift tool he'd fashioned from scrap metal. The array sputtered, emitting a high-pitched whine before settling into a low hum that almost sounded promising. 6 days stranded on this volcanic hellscape was 5 days too many. The transport he'd hired to smuggle him to the Outer Rim colonies had suffered a catastrophic engine failure during atmospheric entry, the pilot barely managing to crash land in a relatively stable region before the ship broke apart. The pilot hadn't survived. Cale had, though sometimes he wondered if that was the better outcome. He'd salvaged what he could from a wreckage and made his way to this abandoned Novacorp mining facility, hoping to find a working comm system. He needed to get off-planet before his former employers caught up with him. The price on his head would only increase the longer they had to search. As the communications array finally stabilized, Cale allowed himself a small smile. If he could patch into a passing freighter's systems, he might manage to arrange extraction without alerting the corporate networks that routinely scanned official channels. It would cost him nearly everything he had left, but freedom was worth the price. A distant rumble shook the station, dust raining down from the corrugated ceiling. Cale froze, his hand instinctively moving to the worn blaster at his hip. That wasn't seismic activity. That was an engine's signature. Someone had landed nearby. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Corporate security was the worst-case scenario, but only marginally worse than the various outlaw factions that fought over Scoria V's remaining resource deposits. The rumors he'd heard in the spaceport bar before departure came rushing back. Tales of a particularly vicious gang called the Crimson Fong, led by a Beastwoman whose cruelty was legendary across 3 systems. They say she's half feline, half demon. A drunk miner had slurred, leaning too close for comfort. Red fur matted with the blood of those who cross her. Eyes that glow in the dark like molten gold. Takes what she wants and leaves nothing but corpses. Cale had dismissed it as spacer hyperbole at the time. Now, with the sound of approaching vehicles growing louder, he wasn't so sure. He quickly powered down the array, plunging the room into relative darkness. There was a maintenance shaft behind one of the wall panels. He'd mapped the station's layout on his first day that might provide a hiding place or escape route. He just managed to pry the panel loose when the first explosion rocked the building. The main entrance. They weren't being subtle. Cale slipped into the narrow shaft, replacing the panel behind him just as the sound of boots and rough voices echoed through the station's corridors. He crawled backwards, deeper into the darkness, trying to control his breathing as the intruders spread throughout the facility. "Search everything," a harsh voice commanded. "There's someone here. I can smell them." Cale's blood ran cold. A beast person's enhanced senses were nearly impossible to fool. He needed a diversion. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small remote detonator, another salvage from the crash. The small charges he'd placed around the facility as a precaution weren't powerful enough to cause serious damage, but they might create enough confusion for him to slip away. His thumb hovered over the trigger when a sudden spark from the corroded wiring next to him betrayed his position. The maintenance shaft flooded with light as the panel was violently ripped away, and Cale found himself staring into the barrel of a modified plasma rifle. "Found one," shouted its owner, a burly human with a scar bisecting his left eye. In the wall, like a damn rat. Rough hands dragged Cale from his hiding place, throwing him to the floor of the communications room. He landed hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. As he gasped for breath, a circle of figures closed around him, humans and non-humans alike, all bearing the same insignia on their mismatched armor. A stylized crimson, Fong dripping what could only be blood. "What's a pretty boy like you doing all alone in our territory?" asked the man who'd found him, kicking Kale's ribs with a steel-toed boot. Kale didn't answer, choosing instead to catalyze the distraction he'd planned. He pressed the detonator in his palm, and a series of small explosions erupted across the facility. The lights flickered, and several of the gang members turned in surprise. Seizing the moment, Kale swept his leg in a wide arc, knocking his nearest captor off balance. He rolled to his feet, drawing his blaster in one fluid motion, only to freeze as a low, commanding voice cut through the chaos. Enough! The single word resonated with such authority that everyone, including Kale, instinctively obeyed. The circle of outlaws parted, and a figure stepped forward. She moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and silent despite the heavy combat boots she wore. Her body was lean but powerful, covered in dark crimson fur that seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. Her face combined feline features with humanoid structure, a broad nose with vertical slits, high cheekbones, and a jaw that hinted at impressive fangs. Most striking were her eyes, amber gold with vertical pupils that fixed on Kale with unnerving intensity. She wore a patchwork of armor pieces, some military grade, others clearly scavenged, over a form-fitting bodysuit. Various weapons hung from her belt and harness, all showing signs of customization and heavy use. A long scar ran from her left temple down to her jaw, cutting a pale path through the red fur. This could only be the infamous leader of the Crimson Fawn. Lyra, one of the gang members, addressed her, confirming Kale's suspicion. "We found him trying to use the comms. Want us to finish him?" Lyra's ear, triangular and tufted at the tip, twitched slightly as she studied Kale. Her gaze was calculating, moving from his face to the modified blaster at his feet to the half-repaired communications array. "You repaired this?" she asked, her voice a low rumble that carried feline undertones. Kale weighed his options. Lying seemed pointless. "Partially. It still needs work." She circled him slowly, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. "You don't smell like a miner or a local." "Engineer? Pilot?" "Both," Kale admitted, straightening his posture despite the throbbing pain in his side. If he was going to die, he'd do it with dignity. The scar man who'd kicked him earlier raised his rifle. "We should just waste him, boss. One less mouth to feed." Lyra's hand shot out with blinding speed, pushing the barrel of the rifle toward the floor. "I don't recall asking your opinion, Maddox." She leaned in closer to Kale, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. Her scent was unexpected, not the rank musk he might have associated with a predator, but something sharper like hot metal and ozone with undertones of some exotic herb. "What's your name?" she demanded. "Kale. And where are you running from, Kale?" Her lips curved in a predatory smile when his eyes widened slightly. "Only fugitives end up on Scoria V, and only desperate ones land in this sector." Before he could respond, another gang member burst into the room. "Lyra, perimeter sensors just picked up drop ships entering atmosphere. Looks like Silas's crew, at least 3 vessels." A current of tension ran through the assembled outlaws. Whoever this Silas was, he clearly posed a significant threat. "Time to go," Lyra announced, turning away from Kale. "Grab anything useful and move out." Maddox gestured toward Kale with his rifle. "What about him?" Lyra paused, looking back over her shoulder. Her gaze locked with Kale's for a long moment, and he had the unnerving sensation of being assessed on levels beyond the physical, as if she were seeing through to his core, weighing his worth with inhuman precision. Then, to everyone's surprise, including Kale's, she smiled, a flash of white fangs against crimson fur. "This one," she declared, "is my loot." Maddox started to protest, but Lyra silenced him with a glare. "Tie him up. Bring him to the Scarab. We're leaving." As rough hands bound his wrists behind his back, Kale found himself being marched out of the mining station at gunpoint. The orange sky had darkened further, dust clouds swirling violently as a distant storm approached. Through breaks in the clouds, he could just make out the contrails of descending ships, the enemy that had the Crimson Fawn on the run. And now, for better or worse, he was going with them, claimed as personal property by a Beastwoman outlaw with eyes like molten gold. The Scarab turned out to be a heavily modified mining hauler, its once-utilitarian frame bristling with jury-rigged weapons systems and reinforced armor plating. The ship's original designation markings had been burned away, replaced by the same crimson Fong emblem that adorned the gang's armor. Inside, the vessel was a maze of repurposed cargo bays and cramped corridors. Kale was shoved into what appeared to be a storage closet converted into a makeshift cell, a metal cot bolted to the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a reinforced door with a small observation window. "Welcome to your new accommodations," Maddox sneered, giving Kale one final shove before sealing the door. For hours, Kale sat on the hard cot, listening to the sounds of the ship, the engine's distinctive whine, the occasional shout or clanging of metal, and the constant background hum of life support systems working at maximum capacity. From these sounds alone, he could tell the Scarab was running hot, pushed beyond its design specifications. The door finally opened to reveal Lyra, now dressed in more casual attire, though Kale noted she still wore at least 3 visible weapons. She carried a tray with what appeared to be food and water. "You should eat," she said, placing the tray on the cot beside him. "I need you functioning." Kale eyed the unappetizing protein paste and lukewarm water with suspicion. "Need me for what, exactly?" Lyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Up close in the confined space, she seemed even more imposing. "That depends on how useful you choose to be. You have skills we need, and if I refuse to help..." Her ear twitched, an involuntary gesture that betrayed irritation despite her controlled expression. "Then you become dead weight, and my crew was right about what to do with you." Kale took a sip of the water, buying time to think. "Your crew doesn't seem too happy about my presence." "My crew follows orders," she replied, "or they don't remain my crew for long." The threat was clear, yet delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that it didn't sound like boasting, just a statement of how things worked in her world. "So," Kale said, forcing himself to eat a spoonful of the bland paste, "what skills of mine are supposedly worth keeping me alive?" Lyra's tail, which he hadn't fully noticed before, swished once behind her. "We need a navigator who can get us through the geothermal maze." Kale nearly choked. "The maze? That's suicide." The geothermal maze was infamous among pilots who operated in the Scoria system, a labyrinth of narrow canyons carved by ancient lava flows, riddled with unpredictable geysers, toxic gas vents, and regions of such intense heat that they could melt a ship's hull in seconds. Few who entered emerged intact, fewer still alive. "Perhaps," Lyra acknowledged, "but it's also the only way to reach the old tech cache in the Obsidian Valley without being detected by Silas's forces or the corporate patrols." Kale set down the spoon. "There's no old tech cache worth that risk. This one is." Lyra pulled a datapad from her pocket and tossed it onto the cot. "These are partial schematics we acquired. The facility dates back to pre-collapse era. Military-grade power cells, weapons systems, medical tech, everything we need to upgrade the Scarab and maybe, finally, get off this wretched planet." Kale scrolled through the fragmented data. If accurate, the cache contained technology worth a small fortune, and more importantly to someone like him, possibly the means to erase his identity completely from corporate tracking systems. "And if I get you through the maze?" he asked. "Then you get your share of the haul and your freedom," Lyra said. "Enough to book passage wherever you're running to, with a new identity that even your former employers won't be able to trace." Kale looked up sharply. "What makes you think I have former employers?" Lyra's expression shifted into something approaching amusement. "Your hands. The calluses don't match a freelancer's. Military or corporate trained. Probably both. And the modifications to that blaster of yours? Proprietary tech. Only someone with high-level access would know how to make those adjustments." Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Kale had been both corporate engineer assigned to a classified military project until 6 months ago, when he discovered what they were really developing and made the fateful decision to sabotage the work rather than enable technology that would harm millions. "Do we have a deal?" Lyra pressed. "Not much of a choice, is it?" "There's always a choice," she said, her tone suddenly harder. "You could choose death. Many have. I'm offering you something better. Kale studied her face, searching for deception, but found only intensity and something else. Desperation, perhaps? The realization struck him that Lyra needed this cash as badly as he needed escape. Her gang, her ship, they were running on fumes, literally and figuratively. "All right," he finally said, "I'll navigate the maze, but I need access to the ship's systems, detailed scans of the region, and—" He hesitated before adding, "My hands free." Lyra's expression remained neutral, but her tail betrayed her again with a quick swish. "You'll get what you need to do the job. But try anything, anything at all, and my claim on you won't protect you." "Understood." Kale nodded. "Understood. Good." She moved toward the door, but paused. "We start preparations in 6 hours. Rest while you can." After she left, Kale finished the tasteless meal and lay back on the cot, mind racing. He'd just agreed to pilot a ramshackle mining vessel through one of the most dangerous terrains in the Outer Rim, guided by fragmented data, for a Beastwoman outlaw who had claimed him as loot. Yet somehow, it wasn't the worst situation he'd been in this year. The next morning, as much as such terms held meaning in space, Kale was led to the Scarab's bridge. The space reflected the same cobbled-together aesthetic as the rest of the ship. Mismatched control panels, seats salvaged from different vessels, and screens displaying critical ship functions next to others that flickered or remained dark. A small, wiry human woman with close-cropped white hair glanced up from the pilot station as they entered. "This the new NAV?" she asked, eyeing Kale skeptically. "This is Kale," Lyra confirmed. "Kale, meet Rez, the Scarab's primary pilot. You'll be working together." Rez offered a curt nod. "Hope you're as good as the boss thinks, because that maze eats amateurs for breakfast." "I've navigated worse," Kale lied, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "This is your station." Lyra indicated a vacant navigation console. "Rez has loaded all our scan data. The approach to the maze entrance is relatively straightforward, but once inside, conventional navigation is useless," Kale finished, already examining the system. "The magnetic fields and mineral deposits interfere with sensors. We'll need to navigate visually and by thermal mapping." Rez raised an eyebrow, apparently impressed despite herself. "Told you he knows his stuff, boss." Over the next few hours, Kale familiarized himself with the Scarab systems while plotting their approach to the geothermal maze. The ship's capabilities were limited, but Rez had performed impressive modifications to the engines and sensor array. What the vessel lacked in power, it made up for in maneuverability, crucial for what lay ahead. The rest of the crew gave Kale a wide berth, except for a taciturn engineer named Vex who grudgingly provided technical specifications when asked. Maddox, the scarred man who had discovered Kale in a mining station, made his hostility clear with glares and mutterings whenever they crossed paths. Lyra appeared periodically, checking progress and sometimes watching Kale work in silence, her presence both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Despite being his captor, she was the only thing standing between him and the crew's evident desire to space him at the first opportunity. "Why did you claim me?" Kale finally asked during one such observation session, keeping his voice low. "As loot." Lyra's ear twitched. "Would you rather I'd let Maddox shoot you?" "That's not an answer." She studied him for a moment before responding. "My crew respects strength and ownership. Claiming you as mine was the simplest way to ensure your survival until your usefulness could be demonstrated. And after that usefulness ends." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Let's focus on surviving the maze first, shall we? Then we can discuss renegotiating your status." Before Kale could press further, alarms blared throughout the ship. Rez's hands flew across her console. "Proximity alert. 3 vessels on intercept course, Silas's hunters." "Battle stations," Lyra commanded, instantaneously shifting to combat mode. "Evasive maneuvers. How long until we reach the maze entrance?" Kale, check the navigation display. 28 minutes at current speed." "We don't have 28 minutes, Rez said grimly, pointing to the tactical display. "Those ships will be in weapons range in 15. Lyra's expression hardened. Then we accelerate. Vex, redirect power from life support to engines. We only need enough air to reach the entrance. Vex nodded, already moving to execute the order. You're pushing an already strained system, Kale warned. If something fails while we're in the maze. If we don't reach the maze, we're dead anyway, Lyra cut him off. Rez, give us everything she's got. The scarab lurched forward as the engines roared to life with renewed vigor. Kale gripped his console as the ship's frame groaned in protest. The temperature on the bridge rose noticeably as life support systems powered down to minimal levels. Weapon systems online, reported a crew member Kale hadn't been introduced to. But we're outgunned 3-1. We're not fighting, Lyra stated firmly. We're running. Kale, find us the fastest route into the maze. Kale's fingers danced across the navigation system, calculations running through his mind. There's a narrow ravine 2 degrees off our current heading. It's tight, but it leads directly into the maze network. The pursuing ships are too large to follow. Rez. The pilot nodded. I can thread that needle, boss. Do it. The scarab banked sharply, accelerating toward the irregular surface of Scoria V. Through the viewports, Kale could see the planet's broken landscape rushing up. To meet them, a hellscape of black rock, glowing red fissures, and vast plains of volcanic ash. Incoming fire, someone shouted. The ship rocked as energy blasts grazed their shields. Alarm indicators flashed across multiple screens. Shields at 60%, Vex reported. They're trying to disable, not destroy, Lyra observed. Silas wants the ship intact. Or he wants you intact, Maddox muttered, earning a sharp look from Lyra. Another hit rocked the ship. Shields at 40%. Entranced to the ravine in 30 seconds, Kale announced, trying to keep his voice steady. Rez, you'll need to reduce speed by 30% on entry and cut hard to port to avoid the outcropping. Got it, Rez confirmed, her focus absolute as she guided the straining vessel. The pursuing ships closed in, their weapons finding range with increasing accuracy. Each impact sent tremors through the scarab's frame. Shields critical. Entrance in 5, 4, 3. Kale counted down, eyes fixed on the approaching ravine. A dark slash in the planet's surface barely wider than their ship. 2, 1. Now. Rez executed the maneuver perfectly. The scarab decelerated sharply, then sliced into the narrow passage like a knife. Rock walls blurred past on either side, so close that the ship's shields sparked against them. They're still behind us. Maddox called out. Kale checked the rear scanners. Only one ship followed. The others are too large. One is enough, Lyra said grimly. The ravine twisted and narrowed further, forcing Rez into a series of gut-wrenching turns and drops. The pursuing vessel matched their movements, its sleeker design giving it an advantage in the confined space. We need a plan, Kale said, scanning the route ahead. We can't outrun them in a straight chase. Lyra leaned over his console, studying the thermal readings. What's that heat signature? Kale focused on the anomaly she indicated, a massive thermal reading just off their current path. Looks like a major geyser system, if the timing is right. An idea formed, dangerous but potentially effective. Rez, can you execute a Stellari loop in these conditions? The pilot's eyes widened. A Stellari in this canyon? That's insane. Exactly why they won't expect it, Kale pressed. It would put us behind them, and if we time it with the geyser eruption, understanding dawned on Lyra's face. We boil them alive. She turned to Rez. Can you do it? Rez's expression shifted from disbelief to determination. Only one way to find out. The geyser field will erupt in approximately 40 seconds, Kale reported, calculations running across his screen. We need to execute the loop precisely at the junction ahead. All crew, secure for extreme maneuvers, Lyra commanded over the ship-wide comm. This is not a drill. The junction approached rapidly, a point where the ravine opened into a slightly wider chamber before splitting into 3 separate passages. The pursuing ship had closed the distance, its weapons systems charging for another volley. Junction in 3, 2, 1. Now, Rez yanked the controls. The Scarab shot upward, then inverted in a stomach-churning half-loop. For a heart-stopping moment, the ship hung upside down, momentum carrying it backward over the pursuing vessel. Kale watched the thermal readings spike. Geyser eruption in 5, 4. The pursuing ship's pilot, realizing too late what was happening, attempted to reverse course. But the narrow confines of the ravine made the maneuver impossible at their speed. 3, 2, 1. The world outside the viewports turned white as superheated steam erupted from the planet's depths. The Scarab, protected by its position above and behind the enemy vessel, rocked violently but remained intact. The pursuing ship disappeared in the scalding cloud. When the steam partially cleared, they glimpsed the enemy vessel listing badly, its hull glowing red from the extreme heat. "Direct hit," Rez exclaimed, a note of awe in her voice as she stabilized their flight path. "They're dead in the water." A ragged cheer went up from the bridge crew. Even Maddox seemed impressed, nodding grudgingly in Kale's direction. "Well done," Lyra said quietly to Kale, her golden eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. "Now the real challenge begins. Welcome to the geothermal maze." Through the forward viewport, Kale could see it, a labyrinthine network of narrow canyons and tunnels, steam venting from countless fissures, the rock itself seeming to shift and breathe with the planet's volatile core. No standard navigation system could map this place. It changed too frequently, evolved too unpredictably. Survival would depend on skill, instinct, and no small amount of luck. And despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, Kale felt more alive than he had in months. Beside him, Lyra stood with squared shoulders, her presence solid and certain as they faced the challenge ahead. For the first time since being claimed as loot, Kale found himself not entirely opposed to the arrangement. The geothermal maze lived up to its fearsome reputation. For hours, the Scarab crept through narrow passages where the walls glowed with volcanic heat, navigating around sudden geysers of scalding vapor and avoiding pockets of toxic gas that would corrode their hull on contact. Every decision meant the difference between survival and destruction. Kale remained at the navigation station, eyes burning from strain as he interpreted thermal readings, calculated safe passages, and directed Rez through the treacherous terrain. Lyra stayed on the bridge, dividing her attention between the navigation effort and periodic reports from crew members monitoring the ship's increasingly strained systems. "We need to set down soon," Vex announced after a particularly close call with a sudden magma upwelling. "Primary coolant systems are redlining, and we've got stress fractures forming in the port stabilizer." Lyra turned to Kale. "Options." He studied the incomplete maps, cross-referencing them with current sensor data. "There's a relatively stable cavern 2 kilometers ahead, large enough for the ship, with lower ambient temperature." "How long will repairs take?" Lyra asked Vex. The engineer wiped sweat from his brow. 4 hours minimum. 6 will be better." "We don't have 6 hours," Maddox interjected. "Silas will have called in reinforcements by now. They'll be scanning for us from orbit." The mineral content in the cavern walls should provide adequate shielding from orbital scans, Kale pointed out. "And we can't continue much further with compromised stabilizers." Lyra considered for a moment before nodding. "The cavern it is. Rez, take us in. Vex, begin repair preparations. Maddox, set up a perimeter defense once we land. There could be indigenous predators." The Scarab limped into the massive cavern Kale had identified. True to his assessment, the temperature here was notably cooler, the air less caustic. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls and ceiling, casting eerie refractions of the ship's running lights. As the engines powered down, Lyra addressed the exhausted bridge crew. "We'll hold position here for 5 hours. Repair teams prioritize critical systems. Everyone else, rest in shifts. We're halfway to our objective." She turned to Kale. "You too. Get some sleep while you can." "I should review the route ahead," he protested, although his body ached with fatigue. "You're no good to us if you collapse from exhaustion," she countered. 5 hours. Then I need you sharp." Too tired to argue further, Kale allowed himself to be led back to his makeshift cell. This time, however, the door remained unlocked, a small but significant change in his status. He had just stretched out on the cot when the door slid open again. Lyra entered, carrying what appeared to be medical supplies. "Sit up," she instructed. "You're bleeding." Cale touched his temple, surprised when his fingers came away red. In the intensity of navigating the maze, he hadn't noticed being injured, likely during one of the violent maneuvers they'd executed. Lyra set down her supplies and examined the wound. "Minor, but it needs cleaning. Hold still." Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she cleaned the cut with antiseptic. This close, Cale could see the subtle variations in her fur, darker around her eyes and muzzle, transitioning to that distinctive crimson across her cheeks and scalp. "You saved the ship today," she said as she worked. "That maneuver with the geyser. Creative. Desperate," Cale corrected, "but effective." Her lips curved slightly. "Desperate measures are often the most effective, I've found. Is that why you're out here? Desperation." Her hands paused momentarily before resuming their task. "We're all out here for the same reason. Nowhere else would have us." "That's not an answer. You're fond of pointing that out." She applied a small adhesive bandage to his cut. "There. Try not to bleed on my ship anymore." Cale caught her wrist as she withdrew, surprising both of them with the contact. "Why are you helping me? Really? You could have left me with your crew's supervision." For a moment, Lyra seemed about to pull away. Then, unexpectedly, she sat on the edge of the cot. "Because you're useful. And because—" She hesitated, an unfamiliar uncertainty in her expression. "Because you didn't look at me with fear or disgust when we first met. Caution, yes. Wariness, certainly. But not the revulsion I've come to expect from humans." "I've worked with non-humans before," Cale said. "Some of the best engineers in my unit were Carvex and Mantiliads." "Worked with," Lyra noted. "Not lived among as equals." Cale couldn't honestly refute this. Even in the supposedly enlightened corporate enclaves and military bases, non-humans were tolerated rather than truly accepted, assigned. Separate quarters, subtly excluded from command positions. "The galaxy doesn't offer many options for beast folk," Lyra continued, her voice hardening. "Especially those of us who refuse to play the roles assigned to us: servant, curiosity, or threat. So we make our own way, take what we need, form our own families." "The Crimson Fong," Cale surmised. She nodded. "My crew isn't just a gang. They're outcasts, refugees, survivors like me. Every one of them was discarded by the civilized worlds. Here they belong." For the first time, Cale saw beyond the fearsome reputation to the leader beneath, someone who had created a haven for those society rejected, carve out a space where they could exist on their own terms. "And the old tech cache?" he asked. "What does that mean for your crew?" "Freedom," she replied simply. "The resources to upgrade the Scarab into a true long-range vessel. To leave this hellhole and find a home beyond corporate or Imperium control. There are rumors of independent colonies in the Drift where species doesn't determine your worth." The longing in her voice was palpable, at odds with her usual commanding presence. This mission wasn't just about survival or profit. It was about hope. Before Cale could respond, the ship's emergency sirens blared. Lyra was on her feet instantly, all vulnerability vanishing as she activated her comm. "Report. Proximity alert," came Rez's voice. "Ground movement approaching from the eastern tunnel." "Lots of movement. Indigenous life forms?" Lyra asked, already moving toward the door. "Negative. Metal signatures. Mechanized units. Could be mining drones or combat mechs," Lyra finished grimly. "Silas found us. Battle stations." She turned to Cale. "Stay here. I can help," he protested, rising to his feet. She hesitated briefly. "Fine, but stay behind me." They raced to the bridge, where tactical displays showed multiple heat signatures converging on their position through the eastern access tunnel. The Scarab's external cameras revealed the threat. A dozen humanoid combat mechs, their armor plating decorated with the same blue markings Cale had glimpsed on the pursuing ships. "Silas's hunter units," Maddox explained, checking his weapon. "Semi-autonomous. Designed for subterranean combat." "How do they find us?" Rez demanded. Later, Lyra cut in. Defensive positions. Vex, what's our weapon status? Main cannons are offline during coolant replacement, the engineer reported. We've got perimeter defenses and small arms. Lyra quickly assessed their options. We can't take off until repairs are complete. We'll have to hold them off. She turned to her crew. Maddox, take 3 fighters and secure the western tunnel. It's our only escape route. Rez, stay on the bridge and monitor sensor readings. Everyone else, defensive perimeter around the ship. As the crew rushed to their positions, Lyra pulled a spare blaster from a weapons locker and thrust it into Kale's hands. Know how to use this? Kale checked the weapons charge and settings. Military standard. I'm familiar. Good. She drew her own weapon, a heavily modified assault rifle with what appeared to be custom targeting systems. Stay close to me. If we get separated, head back to the ship. They exited the Scarab via the cargo ramp, joining the defensive line forming around the vessel. The cavern's crystalline formations provided limited cover, casting prismatic reflections that made visibility challenging. The eastern tunnel mouth loomed dark and threatening, the mechanical sounds of approaching hunters echoing from its depths. They'll try to disable the ship and take prisoners, Lyra explained as they took position behind a rock formation. Silas prefers live captives for his entertainment. Kale's stomach turned at the implication. Charming fellow. You have no idea, Lyra murmured, her ears flattening against her head as the first mechanical forms emerged from the tunnel. The hunter units moved with disturbing fluidity, their humanoid frames housing advanced combat programming. Each stood approximately 2 meters tall, armed with integrated weapon systems and covered in blue-accented armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Hold fire until they're in range, Lyra commanded over the comm. Make every shot count. Kale took a steadying breath, sighting along his blaster. The hunters spread out in a practice formation, scanning the cavern with eerie precision. For a moment, the only sound was the soft whir of their servomotors. Then hell broke loose. The first hunter spotted their position and opened fire, its arm-mounted cannons spitting energy bolts that shattered crystal formations into deadly shrapnel. The Crimson Fawn crew returned fire, energy weapons lighting up the cavern in a chaotic light show. Lyra moved with astonishing speed, her natural agility allowing her to shift positions between shots, never presenting as stationary. Target. Kale provided covering fire, his military training returning in muscle memory as he methodically targeted the hunter's joint mechanisms and sensor arrays. 2 of the mechs fell to concentrated fire, but the others adapted quickly, using the terrain for cover as they advanced. A sudden explosion from the ship's perimeter indicated they were deploying explosives. They're trying to flank us, someone shouted over the comm. Lyra growled, a sound that raised the hair on Kale's neck. Fall back to secondary positions. Don't let them surround you. As they retreated to new cover, Kale spotted a hunter unit scaling the cavern wall, bypassing their defensive line. 3 o'clock high, he warned, swinging his weapon upward. His shot caught the hunter in its chest plate, momentarily staggering it, but causing no significant damage. Before it could recover, Lyra fired 3 rapid shots at the same target, her enhanced eyesight allowing her to hit the mech's less protected neck junction. The unit sparked and fell, crashing to the cavern floor. Nice shooting, Kale commented. Save the compliments for when we're not about to die, she replied, though a hint of satisfaction colored her tone. The battle intensified as more hunters poured from the tunnel. Despite their valiant defense, the Crimson Fawn crew was gradually pushed back toward the ship. Kale heard Vex report over the comm that repairs were still far from complete. We need more time, Lyra muttered, her fur slick with sweat as she reloaded her weapon. And a miracle. Kale's mind raced, analyzing the battlefield. The hunters were coordinated, suggesting a central command signal. If they could disrupt it, the cavern's ceiling, he said suddenly, pointing upward. Those crystal formations, they're unstable. If we could bring them down on the tunnel entrance. Lyra followed his gaze. It will buy us time, but we need concentrated fire on a specific point, and we're spread too thin. Or one well-placed explosive, Kale suggested. Does the scarab have any mining charges left? Lyra's eyes widened in understanding. In the cargo bay, but someone would need to get close enough to place it. Their eyes met, a silent communication passing between them. Without further discussion, they began moving laterally along the defensive line, providing covering fire for each other as they worked their way back to the ship. "Rez," Lyra called over the comm as they reached the cargo ramp. "We need the mining charges. Bay 3, Storage Locker Alpha." "On it, boss." Inside the ship, they found temporary shelter from the firefight. Rez appeared moments later, carrying a small metal case. "2 charges left. Remote detonators. They're not powerful enough to damage the hunters directly, but if your plan is what I think it is, it'll work," Kale assured her, taking the case. "I just need to get close enough to place them." "We'll need a diversion," Lyra said, checking her weapon's charge. "Something to draw their attention away from the tunnel entrance." "The ship's spotlights," Rez suggested. "I can create a strobing effect, mess with their optical sensors." "Do it," Lyra ordered. "On my mark." As Rez returned to the bridge, Lyra turned to Kale. "I'll provide cover. You place the charges. Fast and clean." Kale nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of partnership with the Beastwoman who had claimed him as property just days earlier. Fast and clean. Moments later, the scarab's external spotlights began pulsing in an irregular pattern, casting disorienting shadows throughout the cavern. The hunters' movements became momentarily erratic as their visual systems attempted to compensate. "Now," Lyra commanded, bursting from cover with Kale close behind. They moved as one, Lyra laying down suppressive fire, while Kale sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. A hunter spotted them and adjusted its aim, but Kale was already sliding behind a crystal formation, explosive charge in hand. The tunnel mouth was 20 meters away, partially blocked by 2 hunters standing guard. Lyra drew their attention with targeted shots, forcing them to turn away from Kale's approach. He used the moment to dart forward, placing the first charge against a support column near the tunnel entrance. "Charge 1 set," he called over his comm. Already moving toward the second position, a crystal-encrusted outcropping directly above the tunnel. An energy bolt struck near his feet, showering him with molten rock fragments. He rolled away as a hunter advanced on his position, its weapon charging for another shot. Before it could fire, Lyra appeared behind it, emptying her rifle's energy cell into the mech's back at point-blank range. The hunter crumpled, its systems failing catastrophically. "Place the second charge," she shouted, already engaging another approaching mech. Kale scrambled up the rough stone face, fingers finding precarious holds as he climbed toward the ideal detonation point. Below him, the battle raged. He glimpsed Lyra fighting with desperate intensity, keeping the hunters distracted as he positioned the second explosive. His hands slipped on blood. His own, he realized from numerous cuts on his palms, but he continued upward. Reaching the crystal formation, he secured the final charge and activated its detonator. "Charges set," he called down. "Clear the area." Lyra acknowledged with a sharp nod, beginning her retreat. Kale started his descent, but a sudden energy bolt struck the rock face near his position. The impact dislodged his grip, and he felt himself falling. The world spun as he plummeted, bracing for impact, only to be caught in powerful arms. Lyra had anticipated his fall, positioning herself to catch him. The impact drove them both to the ground, but her body cushioned his landing. "Detonator!" she gasped, the wind knocked from her lungs. Kale fumbled for the remote trigger as hunters converged on their position. With Lyra still beneath him, he pressed the activation button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then twin explosions rocked the cavern, the carefully placed charges shattering the crystal formations above the tunnel entrance. Massive shards rained down, crushing several hunter units and completely sealing the passage in a shower of rock and crystal. Lyra and Kale lay in the sudden quiet, their bodies pressed together in the aftermath of their desperate gambit. Her golden eyes met his, wide with surprise at their success and something else, a connection neither had anticipated. "You all right?" he asked, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Better than expected," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Then, collecting herself, she added more firmly, "We should move. That won't hold them forever." They disentangled themselves and made their way back to the Scarab, where the crew was regrouping. Vex approached immediately, his expression strained. "We've got the coolant systems back online, but the stabilizers still need work," he reported. "Can we hold this position?" Lyra shook her head. "They'll find another way in. We need to push deeper into the maze, closer to our objective." "With damaged stabilizers?" Maddox questioned, rejoining them from his position at the western tunnel. "That's suicide." "So is staying here," Lyra countered. "How soon can we move, Vex?" The engineer considered. 20 minutes. I can rig a temporary solution for the stabilizers. It won't be pretty, but it might hold." "Do it," Lyra ordered. Everyone else, reload and prepare for immediate departure. As the crew dispersed to their tasks, Lyra turned to Kale. "That was impressive work, both the plan and the execution." Coming from her, the simple praise carried surprising weight. "We make a decent team," he replied, testing the waters of their evolving relationship. A hint of a smile crossed her features before she suppressed it. "Don't get comfortable. We're still a long way from the cache, and from deciding your ultimate status." Despite her words, something had shifted between them. The shared danger, the coordinated effort, the moment of connection after the explosion, all had changed the dynamic from captor and captive to something less defined but potentially more meaningful. 20 minutes later, the Scarab lifted off, its systems protesting but functional. They left behind the sealed cavern and the destroyed hunter units, venturing deeper into the geothermal maze toward their objective. As they navigated the increasingly treacherous passages, Kale found himself no longer just guiding them toward the old tech cache, but actively invested in reaching it, not merely for his own freedom, but for Lyra and her crew, for the possibility of what might come after. The heart of the geothermal maze proved even more harrowing than its outer regions. The Scarab crept through passages where the rock itself seemed alive, pulsing with volcanic energy. Gas vents erupted without warning, forcing Rez into evasive maneuvers that strained the damaged stabilizers. Twice they had to backtrack when passages collapsed ahead of them, the planet's constant seismic activity reshaping the labyrinth even as they traversed it. Throughout the journey, Kale and Lyra worked in tandem. He reading thermal patterns and calculating safe routes, she making split-second command decisions when multiple dangers presented themselves simultaneously. The rest of the crew, initially skeptical of Kale's presence, began to accept him as his navigation repeatedly saved them from disaster. "Thermal spike ahead," Kale announced, studying the sensor readings as they approached a particularly narrow section of the maze. Massive energy buildup. Could be a lava pocket ready to breach. Lyra leaned over his console, her fur brushing his shoulder as she analyzed the data. The casual contact no longer seemed strange. They had fallen into a rhythm of proximity that felt natural after hours of coordinated work. "Can we go around?" she asked. Kale shook his head. "Not without adding 6 hours to our journey. And the stabilizers won't hold that long." Options. He highlighted a thin passage on the display. "There's a bypass tunnel here. It's tight, really tight, but the thermal readings are stable. If Rez can thread the needle." The pilot grinned from her station. "I've squeezed this old girl through tighter spots." "The risk?" Lyra pressed, always pragmatic. "If the thermal pocket ruptures while we're passing, we'd have seconds to clear the area before being incinerated," Kale admitted. "But waiting means certain failure of the stabilizers, and going around means giving Silas time to cut us off at the cache." Lyra nodded, decision made. "Rez, take us through." Everyone, secure for extreme proximity navigation. The bypass tunnel proved even narrower than the scans had suggested, a twisted, jagged scar through the volcanic rock barely wider than the Scarab itself. Rez piloted with preternatural focus, her hands steady on the controls as she eased the vessel forward centimeter by centimeter. The ship's external sensors registered the heat of the nearby magma pocket, temperatures climbing as they progressed. The hull began to ping and creak as metal expanded under the thermal stress. Hull temperature approaching critical, Vex warned from engineering. Coolant systems compensating, but we're pushing the limit. Halfway through, Rez reported, sweat beading on her forehead despite the environmental controls working at maximum capacity. A violent tremor suddenly shook the passage. Warning lights flashed across multiple consoles. Seismic activity, someone called out. The pocket is rupturing. Full power to engines, Lyra commanded. Get us clear. Rez pushed the throttle forward, abandoning caution for speed. The Scarab scraped against the tunnel walls, sending showers of sparks cascading over the viewports as they accelerated. Kale watched in horror as the thermal readings behind them spiked catastrophically. Magma breach. 10 seconds to tunnel collapse. The ship lurched forward, engines screaming in protest. Kale counted down the seconds in his head, certain they wouldn't clear the passage in time. Then, with a final bone-jarring scrape, the Scarab burst from the tunnel into a larger chamber. Behind them, the bypass exploded in a fountain of molten rock and superheated gas. The shockwave caught their stern, sending the ship into a barely controlled spin that Rez fought to stabilize. Status, Lyra demanded once they'd regained control. Hull integrity at 70%, Vex reported. Stabilizers functioning, barely. We'll need to land soon for repairs. Navigation, Lyra turned to Kale. He checked his instruments, then looked up with a mixture of relief and apprehension. We're through the worst of the maze. The Obsidian Valley is ahead, and the old tech cache. A moment of silent recognition passed between them. They had survived the impossible together. Set course for the cache, Lyra ordered. We'll make repairs after we secure our objective. The Obsidian Valley revealed itself as they cleared the final passage of the maze. A vast caldera surrounded by walls of polished black stone, its floor relatively flat and stable compared to the chaos they'd navigated. At its center stood their objective, a partially buried structure of unmistakable pre-collapse design, its smooth lines and reinforced architecture a stark contrast to the natural formation surrounding it. There it is, Lyra breathed, an unusual note of wonder in her voice. Exactly where the data said it would be. Kale studied the structure through the forward viewers. Automated defense systems are likely. We should approach with caution. Agreed. Lyra turned to her crew. Rez, take us down half a kilometer from the facility. Maddox, prepare a ground team. We'll approach on foot to minimize detection. As the Scarab descended toward a relatively flat area of the valley floor, Kale caught Lyra watching him. What? He asked. You're coming with us, she said. Not a question, but a statement. I need your expertise with old tech systems. He nodded, surprised by the wave of determination that washed over him. I wouldn't miss it. 20 minutes later, a small team consisting of Lyra, Kale, Maddox, and 2 other crew members made their way across the valley floor toward the facility. They moved cautiously, using the scattered obsidian formations for cover as they approached. The facility grew more impressive with proximity, its entrance a massive iris door set into a sloping wall of what appeared to be neutronium alloy, a material rarely seen since the collapse. No obvious security measures, Maddox muttered, scanning the structure with a handheld device. No energy signatures either. Place might be dead. Don't bet on it, Kale warned. Old tech facilities often had passive systems, mechanical rather than electronic, specifically to avoid detection. They reached the entrance without incident, the massive iris door looming before them. No visible controls or access panels presented themselves. Now what? One of the crew members asked. Kale examined the door carefully, running his hand along its seamless surface. His fingers detected a subtle indentation near what would be eye level for an average human. Here, this is a scanner of some kind. Lyra joined him, her enhanced senses confirming his discovery. Biometric? Probably. These facilities were typically keyed to authorized personnel. Kale frowned. Without the proper genetic signature, we need to override the mechanism or force entry. Neither option is ideal. Why not? Maddox demanded. Force entry, and we might trigger whatever defense systems are still active, Kale explained. Try to override, and we alert the system to our presence, with the same potential result. So we're stuck, Maddox concluded bitterly. Lyra studied the door, her expression contemplative. Maybe not. These pre-collapse facilities often had emergency protocols, ways for unauthorized personnel to gain access in crisis situations. Kale nodded slowly. Maintenance, overrides, or evacuation procedures. But how would we? He stopped mid-sentence, an idea forming. The scanner. It's not just checking identity. It's assessing threat level. If we could convince it we're not a threat. How? Lyra asked. By not being armed, Kale suggested. Old tech facilities were paradoxically both paranoid and trusting. They'd eliminate clear threats, but might allow access to unarmed visitors, especially if they appear to be seeking aid. Lyra considered this, then made a decision. I'll try it. Alone. That's too dangerous, Kale protested immediately. We don't know what's inside, which is why the rest of you stay armed and ready, she countered. If something happens to me, you blast your way in. Before anyone could object further, Lyra removed her weapons, the rifle, 3 knives, and a small holdout blaster from her boot, handing them to Maddox. She approached the door, placing her palm against the indentation Kale had discovered. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like sighing, the iris door began to retract, segments folding in on themselves until an opening appeared large enough for a single person to enter. It worked, she called back, peering into the darkness beyond. I can see a corridor. Lights are activating as I look. Wait, Kale said, moving toward her. He unholstered his own blaster and handed it to Maddox. I'm coming with you. Lyra's ears flicked forward in surprise. You're volunteering to enter an unknown facility. Unarmed? You need someone who understands old tech systems, he reasoned. And 2 sets of eyes are better than one. The unspoken truth hung between them. He wasn't willing to let her face the unknown alone. After everything they'd survived together, separation felt wrong, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical threats. After a moment, Lyra nodded. Maddox, hold position. If we're not back or in communication within 30 minutes, use the charges to open this door. Understood, boss, Maddox replied, though his expression suggested he questioned the wisdom of their approach. Together, Kale and Lyra stepped through the iris door into the facility. The entrance sealed behind them with the same sighing sound, leaving them alone in a softly illuminated corridor that extended deep into the structure. Well, Kale said, trying for levity, no turning back now. Lyra's answering smile was small but genuine. When has that ever been an option for either of us? They proceeded cautiously down the corridor, which sloped gradually downward into the bedrock beneath the valley. The walls were smooth, made of the same neutronium alloy as the exterior, inset with recessed lighting that activated as they approached and dimmed as they passed. This place has been sealed since the collapse, Kale observed, noting the absence of dust or deterioration. Environmental systems must still be operational. What exactly was the collapse? Lyra asked as they walked. The stories vary depending on who's telling them. Kale considered his answer carefully. The official corporate version is that it was a massive technological failure. AI systems turning against their creators, automated defense networks targeting civilian populations. But those of us with access to classified archives know it was more complicated. There was a war, not just between humans and machines, but between factions of humanity with different visions for the future. And the beast folk, Lyra prompted, where do we come from? The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. Kale sensed she was testing him, gauging his response to information that might reveal prejudice or ignorance. The records I accessed suggested genetic engineering, he replied honestly. One faction believed in directed evolution, creating new subspecies adapted for specific environments or tasks. But others say beast folk existed before the collapse, perhaps created even earlier, and simply integrated into society afterward. And what do you believe? Kale met her gaze directly. I believe it doesn't matter where any species originated. What matters is how we treat each other now. Something in Lyra's expression softened, but before she could respond, they reached the end of the corridor. It opened into a vast circular chamber dominated by a central control hub, surrounded by rows of storage units embedded in the walls. The cache, Lyra breathed, taking in the untouched wealth of old tech surrounding them. Cale approached the central console, which hummed to life at his proximity. Holographic displays flickered into existence, showing status reports and inventory lists in an archaic script he recognized from his military training. "This is incredible," he murmured, scrolling through the data. "Power cells, weapons systems, medical technology, just as the schematic suggested. But there's more. Much more." "What kind of more?" Lyra asked, joining him at the console. "Data," Cale replied, his excitement growing. "Historical records, scientific research, star charts for regions beyond the known galaxy. This isn't just a cache, it's a knowledge repository, the kind that could change everything." Lyra's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "Enough to buy our freedom? A new home? Enough to buy a fleet of ships and an entire moon to call home," Cale confirmed. "But we need to be careful about what we take. Some of this technology, it's dangerous. It's the kind of thing that could start another collapse if it fell into the wrong hands." Lyra studied the displays, her expression serious. "Then we take only what we need. Enough to secure our future without compromising everyone else's." Her response cemented something in Cale's mind, a realization that had been forming since their first desperate flight through the maze. Lyra wasn't just a survivor or a leader. She was fundamentally honorable, guided by principles deeper than mere self-interest. A sudden alarm shattered the moment, red warning lights flashing across the console. "What's happening?" Lyra demanded, tensing for danger. Cale's fingers flew across the holographic interface. "Proximity alert. The facility has detected multiple vessels approaching the valley." "Silas," Lyra growled. "He must have found another way through the maze." 3 ships, Cale confirmed, reading the sensor data. "Heavy assault class. They'll reach the valley in minutes." Lyra activated her comm unit. "Maddox, we've got company. Prepare the Scarab for immediate departure." Static met her call. "Communications are being jammed," Cale realized. "We're cut off." They shared a look of grim understanding. They had found their prize only to be trapped with it, their crew unaware of the approaching threat. "Options?" Lyra asked, falling into their now familiar pattern of crisis management. Cale studied the facility schematics displayed on the console. "There's a secondary exit on the far side of the complex. If we can reach it, we might be able to circle back to the Scarab before Silas's forces arrive. And the cache? We can't leave empty-handed after all this." He pointed to a section of the display. "These storage units contain portable power modules, small but incredibly powerful. We each take one. They're worth a fortune and could power the Scarab for years." Lyra nodded. "Lead the way." They quickly located and secured 2 of the power modules, sleek cylindrical devices that hummed with contained energy, then began making their way toward the secondary exit. The facility's layout was more complex than initially apparent, with corridors branching and reconnecting in patterns that suggested defensive design. "Wait," Cale said suddenly as they approached a junction. "Let me check the schematics again. Something's not right." He pulled up the facility map on his portable scanner. "This corridor should lead directly to the exit, but according to this, there's a security checkpoint we have to pass first." "What kind of checkpoint?" "Unknown. The details are classified even in this system." Lyra's ears flattened slightly, a sign of apprehension Cale had learned to recognize. No choice but to find out. They continued forward with increased caution. The corridor widened into another chamber, smaller than the central hub, but still impressive. At its center stood what appeared to be a stasis pod, a transparent cylinder filled with swirling mist, control panels blinking along its base. "What is this?" Lyra asked, approaching the pod cautiously. Cale studied the nearby console. "It's a containment unit for something the facility considered extremely valuable." He frowned as he read further. "Or extremely dangerous." The mist within the pod shifted, revealing glimpses of a shape inside. something metallic with organic components, neither fully machine nor fully biological. Is it alive? Lyra whispered, moving closer despite her evident unease. In a sense, Kale replied, continuing to read the fragmented data. It's a prototype, something called a Sentinel, an autonomous security system with adaptive capabilities. As if responding to its designation, the mist in the pod cleared completely, revealing the entity within. It resembled a humanoid figure constructed of interlocking metallic segments, with what appeared to be synthetic muscle tissue visible at the joints. Its face was a smooth plate with recessed optical sensors that suddenly illuminated with amber light. It's activating, Kale warned, backing away from the console. We need to leave. Now. The pod seals hissed as they began to disengage. Run, Lyra shouted, grabbing Kale's arm and pulling him toward the exit corridor. They sprinted down the passage as alarms blared throughout the facility. Behind them, the sound of the pod fully opening echoed ominously, followed by mechanical movements, the Sentinel awakening from its long dormancy. What will it do? Lyra called as they ran. If it follows standard protocols, it will assess us as unauthorized intruders, Kale replied between breaths, and terminate us. They reached a heavy security door at the end of the corridor. Kale slammed his palm against the access panel, praying the facility's emergency protocols would recognize their situation. The door slid open with agonizing slowness. It's coming, Lyra warned, her enhanced hearing picking up the Sentinel's approach. They squeezed through the partially open door into what appeared to be an equipment bay. Various vehicles stood in varying states of preservation: ground transports, small aerial craft, and what looked like an ancient military exosuit. The exit should be through there, Kale pointed to a distant doorway. But we'll never make it on foot before that thing catches up. Lyra surveyed the available options, her gaze settling on a two-person ground transport that resembled a sleek, armored motorcycle. Can you drive one of these? In theory, Kale replied, already moving toward it. Let's find out. The vehicle powered up immediately when Kale accessed its control panel, its engine emitting a low, powerful hum. He swung onto the driver's position, Lyra climbing on behind him, her arms wrapping securely around his waist. Hold on, he warned, engaging the thrust controls. The transport shot forward with unexpected speed, nearly throwing them both off before Kale adjusted to its responsive handling. Behind them, the security door finally opened completely, revealing the Sentinel. Its movements were fluid, unnervingly organic despite its mechanical nature. It assessed the situation in an instant and began pursuit, its speed matching theirs as it ran. It's fast, Lyra called, looking back. Too fast. Kale pushed the transport to its limits, weaving between other equipment as they raced toward the exit. The Sentinel followed relentlessly, closing the distance with methodical precision. They reached the exit door, but remained sealed, requiring authentication they didn't have time to provide. Kale made a split-second decision, turning the transport sharply. What are you doing? Lyra demanded. Testing a theory, he replied grimly, driving directly toward a section of wall that appeared different from the surrounding neutronium alloy. If I'm right, that's an emergency release point. And if you're wrong, then we hit a wall at high speed. He accelerated toward the target, feeling Lyra's arms tighten around him. The Sentinel was mere seconds behind them, its mechanical limbs propelling it with terrifying efficiency. At the last possible moment, Kale triggered the transport's emergency boost. The vehicle surged forward, slamming into the wall section he'd identified. For a heart-stopping instant, nothing happened. Then the wall panel collapsed outward, revealing daylight beyond. The transport burst through the opening, momentum carrying them into the open air of the Obsidian Valley. They landed hard, the transport suspension absorbing most of the impact as Kale fought to maintain control. Behind them, the Sentinel paused at the breach, its sensors adjusting to the natural light. It stopped, Lyra exclaimed. Containment protocols, Kale explained, not slowing their pace. It won't leave the facility unless directly threatened. We need to get back to the Scarab before. His words died as they crested a small rise and the valley spread out before them. 3 ships had landed near the Scarab, sleek, heavily armed vessels bearing the same blue markings as the hunter units they'd encountered in the cavern. Between the ships and the Scarab, a firefight was in progress. The Crimson Fawn crew had established defensive positions around their vessel, exchanging fire with a much larger force of armored figures led by a tall, imposing man whose very stance suggested dangerous authority. Silas, Lyra confirmed Cale's suspicion, her voice hard with hatred. The warlord stood partially sheltered behind his forces, directing the assault with calculated precision. Even from a distance, his confidence was evident, a man accustomed to victory. The Scarabs outnumbered 3-1, Cale observed. They can't hold out much longer. Then we change the odds, Lyra replied, her decision immediate. Get us closer. Cale guided the transport along a ridge that would keep them hidden from the battle below. What's the plan? We still have the power modules, Lyra reminded him. Old tech like that would contain enough energy to create an electromagnetic pulse if overloaded properly, Cale finished, understanding her intention. It could disable Silas's ships and weapons. Exactly. But it would also disable the Scarab, he pointed out. Temporarily. Vex can restart the critical systems manually. Her arms tightened fractionally around him. It's our only chance. They reached a position overlooking the battle. The situation had deteriorated further. Several of Lyra's crew were down, the others forced into increasingly desperate defensive positions as Silas's forces advanced methodically. I'll need to modify the module to trigger a controlled overload, Cale said, bringing the transport to a halt behind a large obsidian formation. It'll take a few minutes. I'll cover you, Lyra replied, scanning the terrain for threats. Cale worked quickly, using tools from the transport's emergency kit to access the power module's control systems. The device was remarkably sophisticated despite its age, designed with multiple failsafes that needed to be bypassed. How much longer? Lyra asked tensely, watching as Silas's forces prepared for what appeared to be a final push against the Scarab. Almost there, Cale replied, making a final adjustment. Done. Once activated, we'll have 30 seconds before detonation. Give it to me, Lyra said, extending her hand. I'll get closer and throw it into the middle of their formation. Cale hesitated. That's too dangerous. You'd be exposed. And you wouldn't? She met his eyes directly. I'm faster, and my night vision gives me better chances in the chaos after the EMP hits. He couldn't argue with her logic, but something inside him rebelled at the thought of her facing such risk alone. Before he could protest further, a new development below caught their attention. Silas had stepped forward from behind his troops, his amplified voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. Lyra of the Crimson Fawn, I know you're here somewhere. Show yourself, or I start executing your crew one by one. To emphasize his point, he dragged forward a captive. Rez, bloodied but defiant, forced to her knees before him. Lyra's body tensed, a low growl emanating from deep in her throat. That settles it, she hissed. Give me the device. Cale made his decision in that moment. We do this together. I've got a better idea. Quickly, he outlined his plan. Instead of throwing the module into the enemy formation, they would use the transport itself as a delivery vehicle, setting it on autopilot to crash into Silas's main ship with the overloaded module attached. The explosion and EMP will be centered there, he explained. It might give your crew enough time to regroup while minimizing damage to the Scarab. Lyra's expression shifted from anger to grim approval. Do it. Working rapidly, Cale programmed a simple collision course into the transport's navigation system and secured the modified power module to its frame. With the device prepped, they retreated to a safe distance behind an outcropping of black volcanic glass. On my mark, Cale said, finger hovering over the remote activator he'd fashioned. 3, 2, 1, mark. He triggered both the transport's autopilot and the module's countdown simultaneously. The vehicle surged forward from their hiding place, accelerating quickly down the slope towards Silas's position. For a few crucial seconds, Confusion reigned among the enemy forces. The unexpected appearance of the transport, apparently unmanned and racing directly toward them, caused momentary disarray. Silas himself turned, eyes widening as he recognized the threat too late. "Take cover!" he shouted, diving away from Rez and the oncoming vehicle. The transport smashed into the side of Silas's flagship, the impact triggering the power module's overload. A blinding flash illuminated the valley, followed by a concussive wave that knocked combatants on both sides off their feet. Then, as designed, the electromagnetic pulse propagated outward, instantly disabling energy weapons, communications, and ship systems throughout the area. In the sudden darkness and confusion, Lyra and Kale moved. They had prepared for this moment, counting on their opponent's disorientation. Lyra led, her night vision allowing her to navigate the chaotic battlefield with confidence. Kale followed close behind, guided by her occasional touch. They reached the Crimson Fong's position as the crew was recovering from the pulse effects. Maddox, sporting a fresh wound on his arm, nodded grimly at their arrival. "Boss," he acknowledged. "Thought you might be dead." "Not yet," Lyra replied. "Status: 3 wounded, none critical. Scarab's systems are fried, but Vex is working on manual restarts for life support and engines." "Good." Silas's forces? "Scattered, but regrouping. EMP hit them harder. Their weapons were more advanced." Maddox gestured toward where Silas had been standing. "Lost sight of the bastard himself in the blast." "He's alive," Lyra said with certainty. "I can smell him." Gathering his lieutenants behind their secondary ship, Kale scanned the darkened battlefield, mind racing. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they organize a counterattack. And when systems start coming back online, their numerical advantage returns. Then we make the most of those 10 minutes, Lyra decided. "Maddox, get the wounded to the Scarab. Kale, help Vex with the restart sequence. Your old tech knowledge might speed things up." "What about you?" Kale asked, sensing her intentions. Her eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I'm going to create a diversion. Buy you all the time you need." "Alone?" "That's the only option," she cut him off. "This is my crew, my responsibility." Before he could argue further, distant shouts and the glow of hastily lit chemical flares indicated Silas's forces reorganizing. Time was running out. "Go," Lyra commanded, her tone leaving no room for debate. Kale held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Don't die." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Is that an order?" "A request." Then she was gone, slipping into the shadows with predatory silence, heading toward the enemy position. Inside the Scarab, Kale found Vex beneath the main control panel, manually rerouting power to critical systems. The engineer looked up at his approach, surprise evident on his face. "Didn't expect to see you again," he commented. "Thought you'd have taken the chaos as a chance to run." "And miss all this fun?" Kale replied, kneeling beside him. "What's your progress?" "Life support's back, minimal lighting too. But the engines?" Vex gestured to a fuse control module. "The surge damaged the ignition sequence. Without it, we're grounded." Kale examined the damaged component. "We can bypass it. Use the auxiliary thrusters to generate enough power for a manual engine start." Vex looked skeptical. "That's never been done on a Scarab-class vessel." "There's a first time for everything," Kale replied, already pulling tools from a nearby kit. "The second power module we took from the facility, we can use it to jumpstart the process." They worked frantically, racing against time as sounds of conflict grew outside the ship. Occasionally, Kale paused, straining to hear any indication of Lyra's fate, but the chaotic noises of battle revealed nothing specific. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the Scarab's engines coughed, then hummed to life. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the vessel. "You did it," Vex said, genuine respect in his voice. "Engines are online. Main weapon's still down, but we can fly. Get the ship ready for immediate departure," Kale ordered, moving toward the exit ramp. "I'm going to find Lyra. She ordered us to leave if systems came back online." Maddox called from where he was securing the wounded. "Even without her." Kale turned back, his expression hardening. "Then I guess I'm not following orders." Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a survival pack and slipped out of the ship into the darkness. Outside, the battlefield had evolved. Small fires burned where equipment had ignited, casting eerie shadows across the obsidian landscape. The sounds of fighting had concentrated near Silas's secondary vessel, where flashes of primitive projectile weapons, unaffected by the EMP, intermittently illuminated struggling figures. Keeping low, Kale made his way toward the conflict. He had no weapons beyond a utility knife from the survival pack, but he moved with purpose, driven by a certainty that surprised even him. He would not leave this planet without Lyra. As he approached the fighting, he caught glimpses of her, a swift, shadowy form darting between cover points, drawing fire away from the scarab. She was outnumbered, but using the darkness to her advantage, striking quickly, then disappearing before her opponents could respond effectively. Silas's voice cut through the chaos, commanding his forces to converge on her last known position. Kale altered his course, circling wide to approach from a different angle. He found her pinned down behind a fallen section of Silas's ship, exchanging fire with 3 of the warlord's guards. Blood matted her fur in several places, but her eyes burned with undiminished intensity. "What are you doing here?" she hissed when he slid into cover beside her. "You should be getting the ship ready." "It is ready," he replied, pulling a small medkit from the survival pack. "Here, hold still. There's no time for—" "There's time," he insisted, quickly applying sealant to a deep gash on her shoulder. "The Scarab's engines are online. We can leave as soon as we get back to the ship." "We?" she questioned, wincing as the sealant did its work. "Yes, we. Unless you've suddenly developed a death wish." A projectile ricocheted off the metal above their heads, showering them with sparks. Lyra's ears flattened. "Getting back won't be simple. Silas has the area between us and the scarab covered. Then we make a new path," Kale suggested, pointing toward the facility in trance they'd originally used. "The Sentinel. It's still inside, confined by its programming. If we could lure Silas's forces close enough." Understanding dawned in Lyra's eyes. "We trigger the facility's defenses against them." "Exactly." A new voice interrupted their planning, smooth, cultured, and chilling in its casual menace. "An excellent strategy. Unfortunately, you won't have the opportunity to implement it." Silas stepped into view, flanked by 4 guards with weapons trained on Kale and Lyra. Unlike his men, who wore utilitarian combat gear, Silas was dressed in an elegant synthesis of military precision and personal vanity, a tailored uniform adorned with trophies taken from defeated enemies. His face bore the enhanced symmetry of expensive genetic modification, marred only by a single scar that ran from temple to jaw, a deliberate imperfection retained as a reminder of some past lesson. "Lyra," he greeted, as if they were meeting at a social function rather than on a battlefield. "Still scavenging through the ruins like a common thief, I see." "Silas," she replied, her voice a low growl. "Still hiding behind your men, while others do the actual fighting." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A leader delegates. Something you never quite grasped during our association." His gaze shifted to Kale. "And this must be the navigator I've heard about. The one who guided you through the maze. Quite impressive. What do you want, Silas?" Lyra demanded, subtly shifting her position to place herself partially between Kale and the warlord. "What I've always wanted, my dear," he replied smoothly. "Everything. The facility you've so kindly discovered for me. Your ship for my collection. Your crew for my labor force." His smile widened. "And you for old time's sake. None of those things are yours to take," Kale found himself saying, anger overriding caution. Silas regarded him with bemused interest. "Spirited. I see why you keep him around, Lyra, but ultimately irrelevant to our discussion." He gestured casually, and his guards took aim. "Now, shall we proceed to the facility? I'm quite eager to see what treasures you found." "And if we refuse?" Lyra asked, though the answer was obvious. "Then I take the facility anyway, and your crew dies unnecessarily." Silas shrugged. "Your choice, of course, though I've always found you to be practical when survival is at stake." Kale felt Lyra tense beside him, weighing impossible options. Then, to his surprise, she laughed, a sound so unexpected in their dire circumstances that even Silas looked momentarily disconcerted. "You haven't changed at all, have you?" she said, her posture relaxing slightly. Same Silas. Same speech. Same failure to watch her back. Confusion flashed across the warlord's face, quickly replaced by alarm as he registered the sound behind him. The distinctive whine of the scarab's auxiliary weapons powering up. The ship had risen silently during their confrontation, using minimal thrusters to hover just above the battlefield. Now it loomed over Silas's position, its forward lights blinding his guards as Maddox's voice boomed from the external speakers. "Drop your weapons or be vaporized. You have 3 seconds." Silas's men hesitated, caught between their fear of their leader and the very real threat above them. Silas himself showed no such indecision. In one fluid motion, he drew a hidden blade and lunged at Lyra. What followed happened so quickly that Kale would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. Lyra met Silas's attack with preternatural speed, deflecting the blade with her forearm, accepting a shallow cut to protect her vital organs. As they grappled, Kale launched himself at one of the distracted guards, seizing the man's weapon and using it to incapacitate 2 others before they could react. The 4th guard took aim at Kale, but a precise shot from the scarab dropped him before he could fire. Meanwhile, Lyra and Silas had separated, circling each other with the focused intensity of predators. Blood dripped from both their wounds, but neither showed signs of faltering. Just like old times, Silas taunted, feinting left before striking right. Lyra anticipated the move, countering with a slash of her own claws that left parallel gashes across his chest. With the same outcome, she replied coldly. Their combat was brutally efficient. 2 killers who knew each other's techniques intimately, each movement part of a lethal conversation years in the making. Silas had the advantage of reach and formal training. Lyra countered with speed and instinctive grace. Kale watched, weapon ready, searching for an opportunity to assist without endangering Lyra. Above them, the scarab maintained position, its weapons locked on the wider battlefield to prevent interference from any remaining enemy forces. The decisive moment came when Silas overextended, confidence leading him to commit too fully to an attack. Lyra sidestepped with milliseconds to spare, catching his arm and using his momentum to throw him off balance. As he stumbled forward, she delivered a precise strike to his knee, shattering the joint. Silas fell, his elegant facade crumbling as pain and rage contorted his features. Lyra stood over him, claws extended for a killing blow. "Wait," he gasped, raising a hand in surrender. "There's no need for this to end in death. We can negotiate, like you negotiated with the mining colonies you destroyed." Lyra cut him off. "Or the refugees you sold to corporate labor camps." "Business," he insisted. "Nothing personal. We could work together again, be partners like before." "We were never partners." Her voice was ice. "You used me, then tried to sell me when a better offer came along." Understanding dawned on Kale. This wasn't just about rival outlaws or territorial disputes. Their history was deeper, more personal. Silas seemed to recognize his appeals were failing. His expression hardened. "Then do it. Finish me. Prove you're the animal they engineered you to be." For a long moment, Lyra stood poised for the kill, her muscles tensed, claws gleaming in the scarab's lights. Kale held his breath, understanding the weight of the decision before her. Then, slowly, she lowered her hand. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not what they made me. I'm what I chose to become." She stepped back from the fallen warlord. "You'll live with your failure, Silas, with the knowledge that I could have ended you, but found you unworthy of even that effort." The humiliation in Silas's eyes burned brighter than any physical pain. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll find you." "No, Lira interruptive. You won't." She turned to Kale. "Let's go home." As they walked toward the hovering scarab, Silas made one final, desperate move. With surprising speed for a man with a shattered knee, he produced a small hold-out weapon from his boot and took aim at Lyra's back. "Look out!" Kale shouted, throwing himself toward her. The weapon discharged with a sharp crack. Kale felt a searing pain across his side as the projectile grazed him. Behind them, Maddox's return fire from the scarab was immediate and definitive. Silas's body crumpled to the ground, the final expression of surprise frozen on his face. Kale! Lyra was at his side instantly, examining the wound. How bad? He grimaced, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Just a graze. I'll live. You idiot, she muttered, helping him toward the ship. What were you thinking? That I wasn't going to watch you die, he replied simply. Not after everything we've survived. Something complex and unreadable passed across her features. Before she could respond, the scarab lowered its boarding ramp, and Maddox appeared at the entrance, weapon still raised as he scanned for additional threats. Time to go, boss, he called. Sensors are showing more ships entering the system. Could be corporate patrols responding to the energy surge. They boarded quickly, Lyra supporting Kale despite her own injuries. As the ramp closed behind them, sealing out the chaos of the battlefield, a strange sense of finality settled over them. They had survived, obtained their prize, and eliminated their greatest enemy. Yet the significance of those accomplishments felt secondary to the unspoken thing that had grown between them. In the Scarab's medical bay, as Vex treated their wounds with the ship accelerating away from Scoria V, Lyra finally addressed what they'd both been avoiding. You should have let him shoot me, she said quietly, watching as Vex applied regenerative gel to Kale's side. It would have simplified things. Simplified how? Kale asked, wincing as the gel began its work. Your status. The question of what happens next. She met his eyes directly. The matter of my claim on you. Vex, sensing the tension, mumbled something about checking engine parameters and quickly left the medical bay, leaving them alone. Kale considered her words carefully before responding. Is that still how you see me? As loot? Lyra's ear twitched, that small, involuntary tell he'd come to recognize. No, she admitted. Not for some time. Then what am I to you now? The question hung between them, heavy with potential and complication. Lyra moved closer, her movements carrying that fluid grace that had first caught his attention days ago. Was it only days? It felt like a lifetime. I'm not good at this, she said, uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice. Defining things, explaining feelings. Try, he encouraged gently. For me, she took a deep breath. You're necessary. When we were in a maze, navigating together, fighting side by side at the facility, it felt right. Like two parts of something working as they should. She frowned, frustrated by the inadequacy of words. I don't want to claim you anymore. I want to keep you, but not as property. As a partner, Kale suggested, reaching for her hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, careful of her claws. Yes, a partner. The words seemed to satisfy her. Equal. Chosen rather than taken. I'd like that, he said simply. Something in her demeanor shifted, a tension releasing, a guard lowering. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his in a gesture that felt deeply intimate. For a long moment, they remained that way, sharing breath and the simple relief of survival. The ship's intercom broke the silence, Rez's voice carrying a mixture of triumph and wonder. You all might want to see this. We just broke atmosphere and, well, you should just look. In the Scarab's bridge, the crew had gathered at the viewports. Outside, the harsh orange-red glow of Scoria V receded below them, its volcanic surface growing distant as they ascended. But it wasn't the planet that had captured everyone's attention. It was what waited above. Stars. Countless stars, unfiltered by dust or atmosphere, stretching infinitely in all directions. For a crew that had spent years trapped on a single, hostile world, the sight represented something profound. Possibility. Lyra stood beside Kale at the main viewport, her hand finding his as they gazed outward. Where to now, navigator? She asked softly. He considered the question, understanding its weight. With the power modules from the facility, the Scarab had energy to reach nearly anywhere in the sector. And with the data they'd downloaded, star charts, colony locations, transit routes, The galaxy lay open before them in ways they'd only dreamed of. "The drift," he suggested, recalling her earlier words. "Those independent colonies you mentioned. A place where we could all belong." She nodded, a rare, genuine smile transforming her features. "Set course, then, for home." As Rez programmed the coordinates and the Scarab's engines powered up for the jump to hyperspace, Kale realized a fundamental truth. Home wasn't a destination they were seeking. It was already here, in this cobbled-together ship with its misfit crew. In the space that had formed between himself and the fierce, complex woman at his side. Lyra seemed to sense his thoughts, her golden eyes meeting his with understanding that required no words. Together they watched as the stars elongated, brilliant streams of light marking their passage into the future. No longer captor and captive, predator and prey, but partners in whatever lay ahead. The former Loot and his Beastwoman Outlaw, claiming their freedom among the stars.